When the Indianapolis Colts made the decision to bench Anthony Richardson in favor of Joe Flacco, the reasoning was because Joe Flacco gave the Colts the best chance to win, right? Well, over these last 2 weeks, the Colts still haven't ended their losing streak. They now have lost three straight. Two straight of those losses have come with Joe Flacco at the helm at quarterback. And he has a 2 to 4 touchdown interception ratio in his last 2 weeks as the starter. And now with you being 4-6, your season kind of on the brink of spiraling left, and you don't even come close to sniffing the postseason, it might be time for the Colts to just go back to the well and start Anthony Richardson. Look, if you're going to lose, you might as well lose with Anthony Richardson. Let him go out there, get some development, because this kind of play out of a veteran quarterback in Joe Flacco is unacceptable. I mean, early into the game today against the Buffalo Bills, the dude threw a pick six. You don't expect your veteran quarterback that's damn near 40 years old to be having all these costly mistakes. And I think that us as fans, we got a little bit ahead of ourselves when it comes to Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco has now showed us that, he's a good backup. He's a decent starter bridge quarterback to get you through a few portions of the season if your starter goes down, but he's no savior. He's no Superman. He's not an elite quarterback. The way that we've been talking about Joe Flacco based off what he did last season with the Browns, leading them to the playoffs, and the brief success he had this season with Indianapolis, you would have thought this dude was a top 10, top 5 quarterback. But the last 2 weeks, Joe Flacco has come back down to earth in a really catastrophic way. You couldn't even muster an offensive touchdown against the Vikings. You struggled to score touchdowns against the Buffalo Bills today. Something has to give. Something has to change. You thought changing quarterbacks would get things heading back in the right direction, but all things have gotten this a little bit worse. You were more competitive when you had AR at quarterback than you were with Joe Flacco. As absurd as it is to say that, because we're talking about a guy in Anthony Richardson that was completing 44% of his passes. That's the lowest completion percentage that any starting quarterback has had in the last decade. But, I mean, with his athletic ability, how athletic he is running the football with that 6'5", 255-pound frame running 4.43, and you got Jonathan Taylor in the backfield, you're better off trying to win games just running the football with AR and Jonathan Taylor than you are just trying to win games slinging the pigskin 35, 40 times a game with Joe Flacco, because Joe Flacco throughout his career has had moments when he's looked good, but he's also had a lot of moments when he's been an average quarterback. And what I see out of Joe Flacco right now is an average quarterback. I don't see a quarterback that's going to be good enough to lead Indianapolis to the playoffs and recapture the magic that he had with the Browns last season. What often gets overlooked about Joe Flacco's success last year in Cleveland was that the Browns didn't really play a lot of good teams when Joe Flacco was starting and he turned their season around. Their only wins against winning football teams with Joe Flacco being the starter were against the Houston Texans when they didn't have C.J. Stroud, and the Jacksonville Jaguars because they went 9-8, but they were nowhere close to being a playoff team. So Joe Flacco, what he did the tail end of last season, kind of is a little bit overinflated because, even in those games, he wasn't that great. I believe he had 13 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. It's not like the dude was playing out of this world. He was playing some good football for the expectations that he had. A guy coming fresh off the couch, not really playing football in a little bit of a while. It caught you off guard how well he played and how many games the Browns were winning. But the Browns also had a really good defense. The Colts defense isn't bad, but it's pretty decent. You got some really good players on that D-line. You got Kenny Moore in the secondary, one of the best slot corners in the game. The Colts got some talent on that squad, but you don't have a good enough squad to overcome having average quarterback play. And Shane Steichen, he's not that good as a head coach. He's one of those dudes who looks like he's a good offensive mind. He's a great coordinator, but when it comes to being a head coach, he looks a little bit too overwhelmed at times. Indianapolis, you might as well go back to Joe Flacco. You're on a 3-game losing streak. You're not winning with Flacco. The offense still looks stagnant. Go back to what was working. You were winning somewhat with Anthony Richardson. It's not like you were getting blown out in every single game that you played. You can win with that athletic ability. And at this point of the season, when you're going to be in a lot of cold weather games, you got to go on the road, running the football is really pivotal. Or really pivotal. And when you got that monster at running back and Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson in the backfield, it definitely brings a different element to your offense that defensive coordinators have the key on. And I get it that nobody really wants a quarterback that is struggling to complete over 50% of his passes, but at least with Anthony Richardson, he could go 9 of 25, but 3 out of those 9 passes turn into big plays, either a big 60-yard touchdown or a big play that puts you in scoring range. And you were better in the red zone with AR than what you were with Joe Flacco, in my opinion, because when you got a quarterback with that athleticism that Anthony Richardson has, he becomes a big weapon for you once you get into that red area. Because it's like, what are you going to do? Are you going to throw the football, or are you going to give it to Jonathan Taylor, or are you just going to hand it off to that monster at QB? Anthony Richardson is like Derrick Henry playing quarterback damn near. So if I'm Shane Steichen, I will go back to AR. I would tell him, you know what, bro? Like, we thought we was going to sit you, let you develop for the rest of the season, but it turns out you actually give us the best chance to win anyway. And let's face it, the season isn't going to get any easier for the Indianapolis Colts. They got more tough teams to play on their schedule. You got the New York Jets coming up, which, although they're down and out like you are, they're a talented enough team where they could beat you in blowout fashion. So you might as well, if you're going to lose games, you'd rather lose them with Anthony Richardson, let the young guy get that development that he needs to grow. And you know, it turns out Joe Flacco isn't really that big of an upgrade. He's more accurate than Anthony Richardson, but he's making about the same amount of mistakes that Anthony Richardson was making. How much can AR learn from Joe Flacco? What is Anthony Richardson learning on the bench from Joe Flacco when the dude's throwing interceptions and pick sixes left and right? You feel me? I don't really think Anthony Richardson is learning that much from Joe Flacco. If anything, he's learning what not to do at quarterback from Joe Flacco. And the Joe Flacco story, it was good while it lasted, but now it's starting to get to the point where, you know, we've read enough of this story and we're ready to move on to something else. The Colts need to move on back to Anthony Richardson, because at this point of the season, you sat him for a few games. He learned his lesson about tapping out. He got all the rest that he needed on that bench over these last couple of weeks watching Joe Flacco play. Put AR back in at QB. At this point, you can't make the argument that he doesn't give the Colts a better chance to win than what Joe Flacco does when you still have yet to end your 3-game skid. You went from losing 2 in a row to now 3 in a row, and 2 out of your last 3 losses have come with Joe Flacco at quarterback. He hasn't been that good. Just go back to Anthony Richardson.